right, there we go. Thank you. I'm John Vervaeke. I'm part of the study branch of the Bevry community for open collaboration and discussion. We've been going through all of John Vervaake's 50 lectures on the awakening from the meaning crisis just recently. And so now we're able to have an interview with the man himself. Brett, would you like to sort of give a sort of introduction to the series or rundown with that?
Sure. As we have left the axial age towards the secular present, we have lost the connection to ourselves, to each other, to the world, and our sense of purpose. This has been called the meaning crisis. In Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, his YouTube series, Professor John Vervaeke takes us on a journey from ancient Israel and Greece through to the modern age, documenting the history of the meaning crisis and the problems it has caused us, and presenting us the wisdom of the great philosophers from Socrates to Heidegger. Professor Vervaeke presents possible solutions through carrying out practices aimed at cultivating insight and wisdom, cultivating secular spirituality, sacredness, and awe, and presenting the idea of the religion that's not a religion. In doing so, giving us a rich new vocabulary to help us talk and communicate about the meaning crisis and our possible way out. Back to you, John.
What do you think of that, Vervaeke?
Well, call me John, please.
Okay.
Although that might confuse.
That's all right. We'll know which John we're referring to.
I think that's great. I guess the one thing I would want to put a little bit of a plug in for is the series also tries to show the relevance of cognitive science to these questions that have been brought up. And so that would be the one thing I'd want to put in also, because that way I could put the plug in for UFT at the University of Toronto at the same time.
That's a good addition.
That's very good. I mean, I always saw it as a convergence of two arguments: a historical argument, like Brett has pointed to, and then an analytical, scientific type of argument, and then trying to get them to talk as deeply as possible to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really sort of the impressive aspect of the series, is how you're able to really integrate the philosophical sort of background to the meaning crisis, and actually being able to put that into dialogue really with sort of our scientific understandings of a lot of these types of things with cognitive science. It's really incredible.
And so thank you for saying that. I mean, that to me, I think there's an episode where I talk about how important problem formulation is to cognition. And so to me, that seemed to be the only way to really responsibly frame the problem, was to have that convergence of a deep historical philosophical argument with a cognitive scientific argument in order to really get as deep a sort of framework for trying to come up with I guess the best possible, set of responses to the meaning crisis that I could possibly do.
Yeah, and just I don't know. It's certainly one of the large things that I'm appreciative for the series is the fact that you're sort of like providing this language in which people within even within disparate communities can be able to sort of like have conversations with each other and actually be able to talk meaningfully about these types of things while not being restricted by the sort of spiritual language that is kind of restricting or being able to talk about these things that are wholly meaningful to us.
You saw me get excited there. My hands were going because so a lot of people have said that to me, and that is so rewarding for me, because that was one of my explicit goals. I mean, like as I argue in the series, cognitive science is about building language between these different disciplines and these different approaches. And so
synoptic integration.
Yes, exactly. The synoptic integration. And so being able to afford that, but for these, perhaps if you'll allow me, if it's not too pretentious, giving a conceptual vocabulary, a theoretical grammar for synoptic integration between different ways of life and different ways of being. That was one of the things I was most trying to afford. I mean, of course, I'm going to argue for particular responses and solutions and positions. How could I not? But I mean, what was more important to me is that I could genuinely afford that kind of synoptic integration between ways of life. That was really crucial to me, because I see that ultimately as much more pivotal in trying to redirect things towards giving people ways out of the meaning crisis.
Right. I feel so silly. I apologize. I didn't go through the introduction phase, but yeah, my name's John Vervaeke. I've been part of the Bevry community since we've been doing like a lot of just going through all of Jordan Peterson's lectures. And I think there's a lot of like sort of overlap between you and Peterson, but a lot of meaningful, unique differences between you two. I would say my sort of connection to the meaning crisis is actually goes back even before I was born, because like my parents, they were sort of like children of the 60s and had this sort of inbuilt skepticism towards religious institutions, but yet found this strong need to have some sort of like strong religious identity to sort of build up from. And so I was raised in like a fundamentalist Christian household, even to the point of like not even going to church exactly, but rather like building up directly sort of this sola scriptura, only the book itself, the Bible, and then sort of building up from there. And from there, I've been sort of trying to understand my way out of this sort of meaning crisis through Peterson and your work, and as many and through philosophy, as many other places as I can sort of find it.
You and I share that in our background. You probably heard that I was also brought up in a fundamentalist Christian family, and so yeah, I can deeply empathize with your past.
Right. Yeah. Brett, you want to share or introduce yourself to John?
Sure. So my name is Brett, or I go by Pleasure of Doubt online. I've got a small YouTube channel that I recently started where my focus is on having productive discussions between people with different views, and your being a bridge builder between people with different views, and trying to promote different types of discussions, and trying to get past our us versus them biases, figuring out ways around it so we can control for them. I don't think we can get rid of them, but control for them. So that's been a big focus of mine, and John introduced me to your series, and it's been, I think, hugely influential on my current thinking, and very much in line. My ideas are very much in line, I think, with what I've heard from you. And I'm a non-theist, so agnostic, weak atheist, however you want to put it. So I'm one of the nuns, and so I'm right in your target audience here, and so your series, I really appreciate that it provides a way forward for the nuns, that with the I'm not likely, I'm not part of a religion, but I'm not that likely to return to one, but the nuns need, I agree, this the religions have problems, but one thing they have done a relatively decent job is being an institution for meaning generation. And I think secular replacements have not, there's a gap there, and I think what you're suggesting really fits in there. And so I'm very excited to sort of I can see it as a work in progress. I'm very excited to sort of be part of this, just on the ground floor of what seems to be a very exciting project.
Thank you, Brett. That's fantastic. That theme. Well, you've probably seen. I don't know if you've seen any of my other work, but I've been the series I'm working towards next, the After Socrates series, and all of this work I've been doing on dialectic and dialogos is exactly to build upon what you were just talking about here, to take that part of my work and really dive very deeply into it, and to try by going back into the past and looking into the cognitive science to try and figure out, how to again perhaps provide a facilitating language for all these emerging communities of dialogue and authentic relating and discourse and circling and all of that sort of stuff. And so that is exactly where most of my that's my focal attention right now.
Oh, that's amazing.
Nick, you want to introduce yourself to Vervaeke?
Yeah. Let's see. If I were to characterize my relationship to, I'm Nick, by the way. Characterize my relationship to the meaning crisis. I'm probably relatively have spent my life on the front lines of it. I've had a rather chaotic story. I'm also one of the larger users of Paul Vanderklay's time. So I've talked to him many times, kind of running through the details of that story. But I kind of took a very hands-on approach, going and out into bizarre places and finding bizarre people, and yeah, trying to navigate my way through the meaning crisis, kind of starting as a nominal Christian and becoming an atheist at quite a young age, and finding many life experiences I could not properly contextualize in an atheistic frame, and so searching for answers through many perhaps bizarre avenues. And yeah, I often played a more critical voice as we were moving through your series. And one of the things that I kind of realized upon the series wrapping up is that, you know, in reflection, a lot of the points where I might find myself frustrated because it seemed like there was a change in how you were relating to topics as it moved through the episodes, or sometimes I didn't understand why you were making a move you were making, which became clear later why it was there.
Yeah.
I realized, though, that it's very easy to criticize a project where a person is actively working it out, and yet I would not want anyone else to actually attempt in a project like this, right? I would want them to be taking into account novel perspectives and trying to work in novel frames as they continued through it. So I do very much appreciate that, and as some of the others here have echoed, I likewise greatly appreciate the framing and vocabulary that you've offered to make these conversations more available to people across ideological or religious lines. So.
Thank you, Nick. That's great.
And I just want to add that, like, for Daelric, we have in the chat, and he's sort of joined part of the group later on. He's sort of almost like Agent Zero for a lot of us regarding your work, because he at one point got his time with Paul Vanderklay, and rather than having any sort of discussion with him, he just sat him down and watched one of your lectures with him, and that's sort of like what he introduced Paul Vanderklay to your work.
That's great. I appreciate that, and I'm so glad I got to meet Paul.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, you know, it's not every day that you get to think that you did something good in the universe, but that was one of them for me. So I'm very gratified to see that your relationship to Paul has blossomed in such a not virtuous, not virile, but it's flourished in such a lively way.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of affection and respect for Paul. And I've often said, although in some ways Paul and I have some pretty deep disagreements, I feel safe with Paul, and not in that he won't challenge me in my ideas, but I feel safe in the sense that I always have confidence that he's coming into the discussion in good faith, and that's really, really important to me.
Yeah, Paul strikes me as a very caring person.
Yep, very much. I get that too. And he's always been deeply hospitable. And even when he's criticizing my ideas, and I like to take it seriously when he does, he always presents them very fairly. And I comment on that repeatedly.
He's got a real gift for being able to do that, for presenting other people's points of view. I was really impressed with the way that he would manage to elaborate the contrasting positions between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, for example. Even despite the fact that he comes from the theist camp, he really did very well to present Sam Harris's point of view, I thought.
Yeah, I think, it's Paul's gift. Chris Masterpietro and I are putting together an anthology on inner and outer dialogues. And we've asked Paul, and he's agreed to contribute to that anthology because of his facility for doing that. And the way he's even doing these confessional conversations right now, and trying to really explore that important aspect of what I call dialogos. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to Paul very soon.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to that. I can say that September cannot come soon enough. I would be really sorry if your meeting with him and Jonathan Peugeot did not go
Yeah.
forward, because of the COVID crisis or whatever else may come.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, it was really great to meet Jonathan in person. I'm going to try and get Jonathan on my channel too. Um, so, and I just noted the difference, what it is when you meet somebody in person. You don't have this sort of limited, like whenever we're online, there's always this limited time thing around us, right? And Jonathan came in and we had lunch together, we walked around and talked, and conversation goes in a different place when you're in that kind of situation. And I'm really looking forward to that possibility with the three, and also having the three of us together. That's never happened. Only just, momentarily when we were planning the conference and stuff like that. And so I expect that both the context and the fact that it'll be the three of us together, I expect the conversations to go in really interesting and thought-provoking ways.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So we all wrote kind of notes of appreciation. I guess that would probably work best to my introduction and really give a very good introduction. So I guess the best way to describe my relationship with a meaning crisis is that I'm pathologically curious, and I don't think that you can be pathologically curious today without running headlong into the meaning crisis. I don't think that people, nobody that has really been speaking about it. You and Jordan Peterson, I would say, are like, flowers in the wilderness in that regard. So yeah, that's basically how I ran across your work. And the note of appreciation, I wrote this down, was our civilization is fundamentally an agricultural civilization. Our agriculturalist ancestors thought that agriculture was literally to die for, insofar as they were literally willing to starve themselves in the winter rather than eat the seeds they needed to plant the next generation of crops in the spring with. In this sense, we are all benefactors of their willingness to sacrifice themselves in recognition of the importance of the agricultural way of life. My appreciation of the series lies mostly in the fact that I believe that the Four Ways of Knowing presents a contribution to humanity that is as much to die for as agriculture was as our far ancestors were concerned. Sorry, that last bit's a bit poorly phrased.
Well, that's
high praise, but I
Yeah.
mean it very sincerely. So I don't think it's overstated at all.
Thank you for that.
All right. So yeah, I guess we can move into our questions for you, and hopefully I want you to realize that we're doing this the reason that we're raising these questions for you is because we deeply appreciate your work, and we believe in it, and that it can be we want to do our part in being able to better understand it, and also do what we can to maybe help you in certain of these areas. So
Sure.
okay, just so I know you've got a thick skin, and all of our I want it to be clear that our questions. Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
Right.
I mean, I even had an episode where I criticized my own work.
That was quite funny, actually.
Yeah, that's a weird headspace you get into when you do that. I do that much more when I'm lecturing on my courses. I'll put out my work and criticize it. So again, like I say, as long as people are coming at good faith and they're willing to listen and discuss, then yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, Brett, you want to start us off?
Great. So so here's just some clarifying questions on a couple definitions that we'd like to just nail down. So we've seen it describe meaning in different, if similar, ways throughout the course and after. And I'm not sure. It seems that your thoughts may have evolved on this. So could you give us your current definition of meaning and its components?
So first of all, I want to make an important caveat that when I use the term meaning, and I've explicitly said this, I'm using it as a metaphor. That's how the term is being used. That there's something analogous to how parts of a sentence fit together and fit to the world and fit the mind to the world that we're talking about when we're talking. But I'm not talking about linguistic or semantic meaning when I'm talking about meaning. I'm talking about what's often called meaning in life. So if you'll allow me to shift it to that, if you're okay with that, that's what I'm talking about. So for me, what we're talking about in meaning in life, I think meaning for me is ultimately the connect. So there's two parts of it. There's a functionality and a phenomenology, right? And they both have to do with relevance realization. So for me, meaning in life is the connection, the connectedness that is afforded to us by relevance realization. And that there's the functional connectedness, which is our ability to fit our cognition to the world, avoid combinatorial explosion, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the phenomenological connectedness, the sense of belonging and the sense of mattering and the sense that one is deeply connected to oneself, to each other, and to the world. And so perhaps it seems at times like I'm shifting between those, but what I was trying to do with the relevance realization idea was precisely bridge between the underlying cognitive functionality and the phenomenological experience within states of consciousness. So that's why it has sort of that two aspect meaning to it.
And would you include the figuring out our, I guess, the optimal grip on our agent arena relationship as part of meaning, or sort of a core underlying what allows us to have meaning?
No, I think optimal grip is one particular. So optimal grip is a specification of how relevance realization is making an impact within our sensory motor interaction with the world. So the idea is, so relevance realization is a very comprehensive and therefore somewhat abstract concept. And what you're getting with optimal gripping is you're getting basically, okay, but how does the sensory motor interaction and our state of consciousness, how is it specifically shaped and fitted? So how does basically, I see optimal grip as how does the procedural and the perspectival, especially knowing, how are they getting coordinated together so that we're fitting the world in a way that is most functional for our ultimate sort of participatory relationship, the way we've been fitted by biology and by culture in the agent arena relationship. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for that. The other definition we wanted to just get a bit of clarification on is what's uniquely distinct between being rational and being wise?
So what's uniquely distinct about being rational and being wise is that, well, I do see that, I do argue for them being on a continuum. So there's not going to be, I'm being a little technical here, there isn't going to be an essential distinction, because if they're on a continuum, there can't be. But what I would say the difference is, when I'm pointing to rationality, I'm pointing to a systematic and reliable way of overcoming self-deception and affording flourishing. But when I'm talking about wisdom, I'm talking about how these different kinds of rationality, so for each kind of knowing, how they can also systematically relate to each other. So let's say you have propositional rationality and procedural rationality and perspectival and participatory rationality. And then how do they form a dynamical system so that rationality is itself being complexified? That's what I mean by rationally self-transcending rationality.
Right.
So just like you feed intelligence back on itself to get rationality, you feed rationality back on itself, the way the various rationalities feed on each other, checks and balances. So just to give one clear example, the way I say, for example, active open-mindedness is managing our propositional rationality, right? And mindfulness is managing our sort of perspectival. And then what you need is something that integrates the two of them together in a dynamic fashion. And that's now moving towards wisdom, something that's optimizing the relationship between the respective rationalities for each of the kind of knowings.
I see.
But right, you see what I mean? How that's not ultimately a distinction in essence.
Right.
It's a distinction on a continuum. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So John, I really appreciate through your series, you sort of take a bit of a you sort of open it up for a lot of people from many different sort of perspectives that I think it makes it more inclusive for people to be able to interact with your work. But I got to say, I'm curious, like, which camp do you sort of find yourself maybe more leaning towards, perhaps? That being modernist, postmodernist, or pragmatist?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, I share with the postmoderns the critique of the limitation of the Enlightenment notion of rationality. And that's actually come out in what I just discussed with Brett, right? And the limitation of knowing to propositional knowing. So there's these two truncations. And so I share the postmodern critique of that. What I don't share, I guess, I don't like to treat postmodernism as just a homogeneous group, because there are deep and important differences between like Derrida, who I know very deeply, and Foucault. And you know, I've studied Foucault, you know, in graduate school, so I have some understanding. I take Derrida and Foucault very seriously, and other people under the label postmodern, I don't take as seriously, because I don't think they've produced the argumentation and the work. So with that important qualification in mind, right? And see, I even hesitate, because I see Foucault towards the end of his career, especially when he's writing about technologies of the self, and he starts talking about Pierre Hadot's work. I see him coming around to what I'm concerned about, because the problem I have with the postmodernists is they got stuck in the critique of the truncation of rationality and propositional knowing. They got stuck in what Ricoeur, I think, really well described as a hermeneutics of suspicion, and so that everything is under suspect. And then what happens is, it's, if you'll allow me my language, it's continual frame breaking, and there's no frame making, and therefore the project. Like, it's like, well, yes, I get it. The Enlightenment went wrong in this way. But maybe another way of saying it is, where the Enlightenment went wrong is it deeply forgot wisdom. And what I don't hear the postmodernists giving us any guidance in is something that we perennially need, which is wisdom. And so I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, I'm trying to give you this. This is a long answer. I'm trying to say, you know, I'm sort of I take the postmodern critique seriously, especially the critique coming out of Nietzsche and Heidegger, but also aspects of Derrida and Foucault. But I haven't, like I say, I think they get stuck in a permanent, you know, hermeneutics of suspicion. It's constantly frame breaking. And that goes with another point I want to make. It's constantly frame breaking, and they've lost, I think, the frame making. The original project, which is what I think was lost in the Enlightenment, was wisdom. And another way of putting this is the postmodern discourse is usually justified around, you know, concepts like justice and freedom. I don't quite know what the postmodern idea of justice is, so I'm going to put that aside. But but there's a sense in which what I'm saying is, they have reduced freedom to freedom from. Yes, we want to be free from the restrictive grammar of the Enlightenment, but they have forgotten that freedom is also freedom too. But what are we free to? How are we free to flourish? How are we free to self-transcend? If you don't want the Enlightenment language or the metaphysical language of self-transcendence, great, but give me an alternative positive framing. And so I in that way, I wouldn't classify myself as a postmodernist either. So pragmatism. So the pragmatist I know deeply is James. So I'm going to take him as the representative of this. I've read some Rorty, of course, and I've read Hilary Putnam. But James and Stephen Batchelor too, because I think he ultimately comes down on sort of the pragmatist end of things. So James has been a deep influence on me. He's one of my heroes because he's kind of a proto-cognitive scientist, because he's a great psychologist, a foundational psychologist, and an innovative and important, world famous philosopher. He also did some some of the preliminary neuroscientific work too, which was very primitive at the time. But so I like James a lot. The thing I have with James is that I think James, and I don't know if this is the case for Peirce, so I'm only going to speak of James, but I think it's Jamesian pragmatism that's most prevalent. The thing I have with James, and this is I think this comes out in Rorty too, is I think James, see what James is talking about. He's reminding us, if you'll allow me my language, he's reminding us that in addition to truth, we're under the normativity of relevance. And I think that's what the pragmatists were remembering. They're saying, but wait, in addition to truth, there's relevance. And in some important ways, relevance is more important than truth. And I think that's kind of right, but I'm not sort of convinced that he got it right. But what seems to happen in James in ways that I'm quite critical of is he seems to think he can reduce truth to relevance. And I think that's kind of a mistake. And it's, I mean, you're probably aware, this is a classic argument, but I have never really heard a satisfying answer to it. You know, there has to be a sense in which we have some conformity to reality that establishes the relevance. We can't make everything actually come from the relevance. And the way I've tried to articulate that is I've tried to articulate relevance as something that's transjective in nature. And so in that sense, I'm not a pragmatist either. So what label would I mean, I'm in a lot of really great discussion with, you know, Thomas Bjorkman and Pascal, Layman Pascal and Zach Stein, people who identify as metamodern. The problem with that name is it's basically, sorry, this is not meant as an insult to these people. I have a lot of respect for what they're trying to do. But, you know, metamodernism seems to be a name for people who have the three rejections I just gave you. They say, well, I'm not a modernist. I'm not a postmodernist, although I take it seriously. And I'm not just a pragmatist, although I take it seriously. So I guess if you had to stick a label on me, it would be sort of a metamodern label. You know, and David Chapman seems to be going that same way too. I don't know if, but I guess of a little bit of self-critique, I don't know what value is coming out of that label right now. Now, that's not a deep, I mean, that's not a foreclosing criticism. I mean, Layman is putting together, and Chris and I have written a chapter for it, like an anthology on metamodernism. And so I think what is going to start to happen is a discourse around what this is as opposed to what it isn't. And I think if we start to move to a positive definition rather than to a negative definition, I'll feel more confident in whether or not I will self-designate as a metamodern.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Right. Nick?
Well, thank you.
So this question kind of comes from topics that Brett and I brought up multiple times while watching your series. And it in some ways relates to how the propositional can, in some sense, feed back down our chain of knowing. Yep. But it's while it is the case that non-theists and theists can have experiences that are wholly meaningful to them, are there nonetheless differences in meaning? And to what degree do the theist and non-theist propositions afford the ability to meaningfully contextualize a transformative experience?
I think that's an excellent question. It's a question I'm giving a lot of thought to right now, Nick. And so this is very much more. So sorry, this sounds grandiose, but it's more at the cutting edge.
I gave you the invitation.
It's a little bit so it's more cutting edge, so this is going to be a little bit less well thought out perhaps, but maybe that'll allow us to explore it a bit together. I don't know, but I'm open to it. So I think that one of the things I'm trying to get a sense of is well, two things. Like I said, it's definitely the case, I acknowledge, and I think explicitly do this. I think it's in episode 11 or 12, you know, when people go into these, you know, higher states of consciousness, they'll come out of it and they'll say diametrically opposed things, which is why I said that's not probably a good guide to the phenomenology and the functionality. But you're saying, okay, if I'm putting words in your mouth, just challenge me. You're saying, yes, I get that, but are you implying that the propositional stuff makes no difference? And I didn't want to say that either. So is that a fair, like, if I got sort of the knife edge of your question? If
I believe so.
Yeah, okay, great. So yes, because the idea of, and I do make clear that all these kinds of knowings are feeding up and feeding down each other in a very complex, dynamical fashion. And so one of the ways, now, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive answer, but I'm hoping it will be an insightful answer. I'm trying to look at, worldviews and how they function, and how they're often pivoted around, or they have sort of a focal, they've got subsidiary stuff focusing on exemplary sort of people who have some disclosure of what's ultimate. I mean, so I'm thinking, and so the four that I've been looking at, I've been looking at like Neoplatonism, Taoism, Buddhism, and Vedanta. Again, I'm not claiming this is exhaustive. I'm not claiming this is exhaustive. But what you see, and what's really interesting, is there's kind of a dimensionality here, in that they all sort of talk about, they all talk about this, all these dimensions I'm going to lay out in a sec. But what they do is they foreground and background them in different ways. I almost think about it like they have sort of different, they're in the same state space, but they draw different attractors through it, if that works for you as an analogy.
Yes, it certainly does.
So, so again, what I'm saying is so I don't want people jumping on me, because I'm clearly saying that all four of them talk about all four of these dimensions. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what the propositional stuff seems to be doing, is it seems to be, right, in ways in which they foreground and background certain aspects. So for example, I think Neoplatonism, puts, it tries to get at the ultimate sort of as the source of intelligibility, right? But it talks about other things. Taoism, and I've practiced this for 29 years, so this isn't just, Taoism seems to try and get at the ultimate through like sort of self-organization in a really profound way. The Tao is the sort of ultimate way in which things flow and are organized. Now, both of them talk about the other. Neoplatonism also talks about how things self-organize. Taoism also talks about intelligibility. So I'm talking again, right? And then, Buddhism, especially, Shunyata, tends to put a lot more emphasis on, that the way the ultimate is revealed to us in the constant, the constant withdrawal into the moreness of things. Right, but it also talks about intelligibility, and it also talks about flow, right? You see what I'm trying to do here? And then Vedanta, it talks, about the sort of the way the ground within and the ground without resonate with each other as a way of talking about the ultimate. But again,
Atman and Brahman.
Yeah. So you see what I mean? Again, all four of them talk about all four of these dimensions. But what they seem to be doing on the propositional level is they seem to have one as the gateway point on the geometrical figure. I'm just using a metaphor. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah. No, it is.
So they basically say, if you look here, right, from this vantage point, this is how to look at the shape. And so they're all, right, so I see the propositional stuff as actually doing that. And now the question I have, and I don't have a good answer for you right now, is well, two questions. Is, well, why this reshaping? And I think it has something to do with sort of cultural historical relevance realization, right?
Well, and perhaps adaptability to the arena.
Yes, exactly. And then how it does that is because I've been concentrating so much in the cog sci of how participatory knowing makes possible perspectival, which makes possible procedural, which makes possible propositional. But how it goes the other way down, that's, well, you see what my hands are doing. So I acknowledge that it does. I don't have a very good answer for that right now, but it probably has something to do with the way propositions can displace us in time and space and modality in the way in which interactions, interactions, perspectives, and ways of life, agent arena relationships can't do that. So it has something to do with the three kinds of displacement that you can find in language. And I think what that does, but I don't know I don't have a precise answer. That's the best I can do right now.
That's great. Yeah, and I've thought about it sometimes as, right, it appears that the propositional is always retrospective. It's always looking backwards, right? It's coming up with explanations for these embodied experiences. Yet, upon creating it, it also projects itself into the future, such that when the experience comes around again, it's also kind of loading an a priori framework onto it.
I think so. I agree with that. I think so. And I think it's not only doing that diachronically. I think another thing it's doing is it's trying to afford, you know, a displaceable kind of communication for affording distributed cognition.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I think it's both diachronic and synchronic, and then there's some kind of dynamic also between the diachronic dimension and the synchronic dimension of that.
Yes.
And then what I'm interested in this is much more speculative. Okay, so always acknowledge, right, the plausibility of your claims as much as you can, right?
Yes.
But I'm really interested in the fact that that it's possible to, the way people can be metasystemic is you can sort of move between these different world forms, as I call them, and you can do something like deep learning between them, because they are transformable into each other. You can do something like a compression on them and get what's invariant between them, right? But each one is the variation, and then you can cycle between the compression and the variation, and that, to me, strikes me as a very interesting possibility that is afforded to us within our pluralistic culture that wasn't so much afforded for people in the past. And so that might be an important part of the religion that's not a religion, that new way of sort of doing deep learning on the world forms.
So would you almost consider that like a dynamic form of perennialism?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've been sort of working that out with Zach Stein, where I was saying, a lot of us cut our teeth on Huxley, and I don't want to say anything nasty about Huxley, but standard perennialism, yeah, I think for scholastic reasons, it's questionable in some ways and philosophically. Yeah. And Farrar has done some excellent work on that. The role it has within transpersonal psychology, and I point people to that. He's had a deep influence on my thinking. But yeah, replacing a perennialism of that kind of shared propositions, like Huxley tried to do, with this dynamic neo-perennialism, that's exactly sort of what I'm thinking about as something that might play a pivotal role in the religion that's not a religion.
I see. That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Ben, who's the founder of Bevry, and he's been part of us as we've been going through this series for a good portion of it. So Ben, go ahead.
All righty. So my question is, awakening from the meaning crisis is the answer, but how can we have more people ask the question without using an imposition?
Well, sorry, and this is not meant to be in any way dismissive. Well, one of the things you could do is have a worldwide crisis.
We've rephrased this several times. My original one was, create market necessity through selective pressures such as market and social catastrophes that necessitate survival or self-actualization or grassroots marketing. Let me try the more difficult one if you might.
Okay.
Alrighty. So the self-actualization meme seems to increase the fitness of its host, such as through preemptive resolution of dissonance and the elimination of axiomatic falsities, both of which can prolong harm if not addressed. Sure. As such, my interest is in the fitness of the self-actualization meme. That is to say, the at-risk population, the rate of transmission, and its competitive survival. So looking at this from an epidemiological perspective, in the same way we're tracking coronavirus. So awakening from the meaning crisis is a transmission vector of the meme of self-actualization. Besides making more content such as awakening from the meaning crisis and marketing such content to others, what else can be done to increase the spread of this meme, and what would you recommend? Okay, well, there's two questions in there. One is about the meme itself, and then one is about the meme's promotion. I tend to think, you see in both Kohlberg, so two of the pillars of self-actualization are Kohlberg and Maslow. And it's interesting that both of them towards the end of their career said that they had gotten it wrong, that there was a stage beyond self-actualization. And independently, they both came to the label of self-transcendence.
And so I would hope, in fact, that the one of the things I would like to do with the meme, doesn't that sound pretentious? One of the things I would like to do with the meme is to actually say, no, self-actualization is actually an affordance of self-transcendence, and we need to move back to what that means and what Maslow and Kohlberg and others meant by it. And then that sort of that might tie back into my answer to the promotional aspect of your question. And this has to do with the thing I've been talking about. I came up on Peter Lindbergh on the Stoa, and I talk about stealing the culture. And what I mean by that is I've been doing, if you'll allow me, these, the theory is very top down, but I've also been doing a lot of bottom up work. I've been trying, and I mean participant observation, involvement, commitment, connection, giving my time and talent and resources to the bottom up task of helping people build ecologies of practices, build actually communities in which these ecologies of practices are properly homed, not just housed, but properly homed. And I've been doing a lot about that. And then trying to get these various communities to network and talk together and try to, well, like I say, try to build a bottom-up alternative culture. So look, so my model here is Christianity, right? And the way it stole the culture of the Roman Empire. And it did a lot of bottom-up stealing of the culture before the top-down propositions actually were able to get, significant purchase. So I think, yeah, you should be making the arguments, and nobody stopped making the arguments. But I think what has to be done is, well, a lot of, and I'm playing on these words deliberately, a lot of cultivation of culture needs to be done. And so I'm devoting a lot of time to that. And I'm talking to people, that are putting time and talent into doing it like at various scales of social organization. And so I think that's very, very important. Why the two things might go together is, in order to build communities, in order to build a culture, I think you need a normativity beyond self-actualization. You need a normativity that wants to engage in self-transcendence by precisely affording that sense of connection to systems of distributed cognition that transcend the individual self. So that's how I would answer you.
Cool, great. It's very similar to what we're doing at Bevry and a lot of the mission of Bevry. So that's really cool.
Good. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
We may have lost John temporarily.
So Daelric had the next question.
Yeah, it's kind of a question from all of us, because I mean, we're putting these questions together, and this one was kind of an amalgamation of a common concern that a lot of us had. So I'm just going to read it. Early in the course, you seem to point to the crucial role that narrative wisdom, ethics, ritual, and the like.
Yeah.
You've crafted a narrative for this course. In the third of the course, it seems you downplay narrative, reducing it to its role only in symbol making. What role do you see narrative playing in resolving the meaning crisis? And do you see a role for the crafting of a dynamic ethics?
Right. Could you hear that?
No, I lost the last little bit of that. It was garbled.
Okay, I'm just going to reread the last sentence. Is there an adequate replacement for narrative as a tool in transmitting wisdom and dynamic ethics? Did you catch the whole part? I did. There anything else that was missing?
No, I think I have the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think your appraisal of my appraisal of narrative is accurate. So I think I'm going to invoke this term, and I have a distinction behind it. And if you want to dig into that, we can, but we can't do everything all at once because we're limited human beings.
Right.
So I think narrative is indispensable to becoming a cognitive agent. I tried to lay out those arguments, and I think narrative is also very good practice for getting and this is Urero's argument, our cognition into a kind of dynamical system of processing that helps us to get into deep conformity to how the world unfolds. And I think narrative is very important that way. So that's the positive side of my evaluation of narrative. The issue I have, and I think narrative, and therefore narrative plays an important role in ritual and in symbol. The part I was critiquing is when we try to, do I want to use the Freudian term here? Maybe. When we try to see reality ultimately as a narrative.
So it's the totalization of narrative.
Pardon me?
That's the problem. Is it the totalization of narrative that's the problem?
Well, two things. Yeah, there's two things. It's the totalization. It's the totalization of narrative. And I get that, because that totalization, you know, we're a story and then reality is a story. It's a way of affording deep conformity. And as long as that's understood symbolically, that's why I spent so much time on it, I think that's fine. But when the totalization becomes the justification, even the a priori, in like not the logical sense, but the intuitive sense, right? Of a grand metaphysical teleology, that's where I start to find it problematic. Precisely,
yeah, it leads to authoritarianism.
Well, it leads to totalitarianism. So the political consequences of totalitarianism, utopianism, and those two often go together. It also leads to, it almost inevitably leads to people ultimately, how do I want to say this? It leads to people sort of making pronouncements about science as an enterprise that I think they can't justify independent from their commitment to teleology. Well, they'll say, well, science shows, you know, that things don't happen on purpose, and I give all the arguments for that, and therefore science must be wrong because I believe there ultimately is a teleological function to the universe, and then I find that a circular argument, and I find it a very frustrating argument, because it's like, well, you need to give me arguments independent of a presupposition of teleology or the projection of narrative for why you can countervail all this argument, right, coming out of science that there isn't a teleological metaphysics at work. I need something independent from that. And then what circles around is it circles around to sort of this like, well, you know, we've always told stories, and it's like, no. I don't find that a convincing argument. So the issue, what I was trying to do, and one more point about this. So totalitarianism, utopianism, I find it leads to often what I consider illegitimate arguments against science, and then third, it overemphasizes purpose as the factor that causes meaning in life. And in fact, people, it so overemphasizes it that people use those terms as synonymously. They use finding your purpose and meaning in life as if they're the same. And that just flies in the face of research that we have. Yes, you know, having purpose in a sense of a goal that organizes your other goals, it matters. But first of all, it's not the sole factor of meaning in life, and it's not the most important factor. Mattering to other people and to other things, being connected to something bigger than yourself, right? Just that mattering is way more important than purpose. Now, if you
I have a slight bit of pushback on that, because isn't narrative the way that we determine how people matter to us to the degree that we're deciding how their goals match up with ours? We use narrative to evaluate that, and how other people matter to us is a function of that exploration of narrative. I don't see how we can do that without narrative. I think
no. I agree with you on that. I think narrative is, and that's Daniel Hutto's argument, which I talked about, right? That you can't pick up on other people's mental states without narrative. But I don't think you need then to say, well, the reason why that works is because reality is unfolding in some sort of grand narrative. What you can say is narrative, and this is how I try to frame it, narrative is a very powerful psychotechnology for picking up on other people's mental states and putting us into a frame of mind that, you know, that would just like, so if you'll allow me a weak argument by analogy, so I'm doing it for purposes of explication. I think literacy is such a powerful psychotechnology too, but I don't think that means in any way that the universe is somehow literate or unfolding according to the principles of literacy. Now, I hope that strikes you as a somewhat, you know, wow, that's a weird claim to make. that's how the claim that because narrative is so indispensable to us and to understanding and knowing each other and getting meaning in life, that somehow legitimates, projecting it on to, reality. I find that very, very questionable. And I think
I do take your point with respect to the idea that narrative can be overinflated. I personally wouldn't contest that at all. I do think that there are some elements of the question that I think we'll come back later to Nick with respect to the idea of a dynamic teleology, but I'll wait. I don't want to jump ahead of the queue. Is there anything else that you wanted to say to the question?
Well, I wonder if I could jump in a bit. Just so you talked about the psychotechnology aspect of narrative, and you've gone over in your course, how essential narrative has been in terms of myths and parables, and in terms of communicating patterns, of even identifying patterns in a way that we might not identify
totally
otherwise. So with the religion that's not a religion, like, do you see a role for the crafting of new narratives that are not designed to be dogmatic, they're designed to be dynamic, maybe even evolving, but do you see a role for crafting
I do.
New parables?
Yep. And so I do. First of all, two things. One thing is we need to widen the space for the claims made by wisdom traditions, that they ultimately get that sense of connectedness in a trans-narrative or post-narrative state. You have claims for this from clearly in Stoicism, where it advises you ultimately to give up on the narrative projects and pursue the vertical project of ontological depth. You definitely get claims like that in Buddhism. Part of what it means to give up the ego is to give up the idea that you're the center of a narrative, right? In some powerful ways. So first of all, I'm saying we need to make space for the deep, important claims that have been made by various wisdom traditions, that there are post-narrative states that seem to be actually deeply enhancing of meaning in life. That's one point. And so that means that we should therefore treat our narrative projects under that realization. And this is my way of trying to constrain them so they don't become totalizing. And again, this is more pro tem, I'm exploring this idea, and it's because you said this dynamic narrative. I'm trying to say, if we could think of narrative rather than coming to closure as having a different function. So one of my inspirations for this is Tolkien's theory of fantasy. And so Tolkien has what he calls a recovery theory. And he's deeply critical of treating fantasy as escapism. And he's deeply critical of treating it as some sort of allegory of another world. He rejects both of those. Instead, he uses an anthropological analogy. He says, the way an anthropologist goes to another culture, has to go through culture shock and go through this enculturation. And then when they come back to this culture, they can see things that they couldn't see before, right? And so he proposes that at least his fantasy, his literature is supposed to have exactly that function. So take that notion and then take the emerging notion we have of augmented reality, where we sort of integrate, and we do this in experiments now, so this is a real thing. We sort of integrate virtual reality and real reality so that we can augment aspects of reality that we normally don't have direct access to. And I'm thinking the narrative of the future, oh my gosh, or at least the narrative, well, you asked me the question, so I'm allowed to talk this way, right? Would be an integration of that we've got sort of augmented, it's fiction, but not in the sense that it's disposable. It's, so I'm trying to get back this older notion of fictive, which is closer to the word fact, but it's not the same as fact. This fictive thing that augments reality and allows us to recover it more deeply. So it's not just entertaining falsity, and it's not the same thing as our truth claims, but it's a transformative process by which we're always recovering new depths. And in that sense, it's not oriented, right? It's not a fixed product that is oriented towards closure in the way, and it makes the conformity to reality actually the foregrounding point of the narrative.
All right.
Would you guys be all right if I jump to the teleology question, just because it seems so deeply tied to this conversation?
I think it's a good time.
Sure. perfect. Thank you, Nick.
So in regards to narrative and kind of our perception on it, well, I can read the question and fill it out if it needs it.
Sure.
In the series, you throw out a teleological mode of understanding the world. However, you seem to replace it with aspiration. Some of us have been playing with the idea of an open-ended telos, which is intended to communicate an optimal dynamic state rather than a static perfect one.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. So so that lines up with what I was just trying to say. And then I would use this language I'm going to use to address your question and distinguish between the two kinds of narrative. So John Keeks makes this excellent distinction between goals and ideals. The word ideal is not maybe the best because we have all these associations with it, but allow me to use it. I'm going to use it the way he uses it here. So goal, right? And think about how goal is related to problem solving. And you see that in the having mode, and ideal is related to confronting mystery and the being mode. And these are fundamentally different existential modes, right? And so keeping these things distinct is also a way of avoiding modal confusion. So there's goal, or a goal is you are trying to get to a state of completion. It is a state of affairs. It's a state in the world that in some sense brings something to an end. You come to rest in the goal, to use the famous Greek phrase, right? So you are no longer in motion once you've achieved the telos, right? To use a classic sort of Aristotelian framework. So Keek says, compare, and you can see why that, so problem solving is goal oriented because you are trying to get to a state that completes whatever it is you lack or that is an obstacle, okay? Great. You can see why that's having mode. So Keeks compares that to ideals, and ideals are not goal states. They are what I would call virtual engines. There's sets of constraints on, so there are constraints on the manner of how you do anything, right? And so he talks about, like he said, one of his examples is, honesty is not a goal state. You don't get to it and say, aha, now I'm done. No more honesty for me. I can just rest, right? And same thing with wisdom. And so I think narratives, and the point about that, the point about honesty is, right, it is well comported with the being mode because it's actually a virtual engine on ongoing development rather than the attempt to get to a completed goal state. And so I think narratives that are ideals, like ideal narratives, I don't like this language, but it's his language, ideal narratives within the being mode, I think are I don't have any criticisms of them.
I see.
I think they are really important, and that's what I was trying to get at with this sense of. But how, so what is it if it's not the if they don't resolve, right? If the problem isn't solved, traditional ways of understanding narrative. If the problem isn't solved and we don't, what's the point of the narrative? Well, this is what I'm trying to get at with Tolkien's notion of fantasy. The point of the narrative is the perpetual recovering, right, of this world by augmenting it through fiction and doing that kind of, so it's an ideal rather than a goal. And it's a different kind of narrative. It's a different kind of narrative.
So, do you see any room in there to appropriately use the description of an open-ended telos, in that there is something bizarrely, almost like, it's a terrible term, but metastatic about a optimal dynamic state?
Yeah, I mean, metastable is perhaps the,
stable,
that's the,
yes.
the metastable. Yeah, I think metastability is a thing. So let me ask you then, because I need, this will help me answer you better if you answer my question. This sounds like a teleology that is severing itself very deeply from any notion of final causation. Is that fair? Or am I mishearing you?
Well, yes and no, right? Because I'm approaching this from within a Christian framework.
Sure.
So I would make the argument.
Yeah, I'm respectful of that. You know that, right?
Yes, yeah, certainly.
Okay.
And I would actually make the argument that the telos that Christianity is intended to communicate is one of a dynamic optimal state, much more so than a completed the world is over state. Whereas perhaps this may not be fair, but when I look at Buddhism, I see more of a closed telos, because there's the dissolution into sunyata, which has this kind of finalizing effect.
Yeah, it does, but it's the blowing out, so it's not a completion. I get your point though. There is a kind of closure there, but the whole point about shunyata is form is emptiness, so it's not supposed to be understood as any kind of closure, right? But I don't want to get into fine-grained things about Buddhism. So so you think that in some, I don't want to be unfair to you, Nick.
Go for it. Yeah, please.
I mean, right, and I don't want to impose, some sort of simplistic schoolyard theism on you. I'm not trying to do that either. But you have some sense that there is a future there that is somehow shaping how things are moving. Is that what's left of the final causation?
I think I think that I think it's just more accurate to describe the final causation in terms of a optimal dynamic state that we might call union with God, but that's not actually commenting on a final agent arena staticness. It's communicating the best place from which to interact with the agent in the arena.
So there is something that I've talked about from the Christian heritage, especially the Eastern Orthodox Neoplatonic, the notion of epectasis that you get in Gregory and especially Erangina, that so it's not that we come to rest in the beatific.
Yes.
That
the permanent revelation.
We're permanent revelation, permanent self-transcendence. And then what the causation goes from being a future state, rather what it is a permanent affordance. So my understanding is that it's always present and it's always affording. What's changing is sort of the trajectory and speed of our self-transcendence. And I like the notion of epectasis. That's why I brought it up in the series. I proposed it as an alternative to sort of standard notions of teleology. That's exactly why I brought it up. Got it.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'll let someone else.
I want to add one more thing, sort of in your favor, if that's correct, if I'm not imposing on you, because and this is coming out of the participant observation and the work I'm doing, and Yaden's written a book on this. It's good. There's a phenomenology to this that's and I felt it too when I'm in the circling practice, right? There's a sense of people have, and this is titled Yaden's book, the sense of being called, and a guy talks about this sense of hearkening, and you get a sense that, right, that, but he puts it in this like you get there and then you realize it's always been there, but it's been drawing you, and I get that phenomenology, and I think I'm not totally happy with the answer I gave you, precisely because there's a piece of that phenomenology that needs to be better captured.
It's interesting to give a heretical description of a spiritual experience I had. I had the sensation of expanding in some sense to consume God, right? To capture it, and exactly at the moment of capture, it was the constant realization of it being the thing right outside of my frame, and that I feel like related to your simultaneous coming in and pulling away.
Yes, very much. And that's also Gabriel Marcel's distinction between a problem and a mystery, right? In a mystery, whatever framing you bring a frame and it doesn't work, and you try a bigger one, and that's just what you did with your arms, right? You realize the framing is that, so you get into the transframing, and I think there's a deep connection between transframing and epectasis, and a sense of reality being this inexhaustible moreness that comes into suchness, and also this sense of affordance, but it's drawing us out. There's more there. It's rich, tasty.
It is.
So I'm not totally satisfied with the answer I gave you. So I'm acknowledging that here's a place where I think, well, I need to do more work, and other people do too.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Brett, I think you had a question.
Sure. So from listening to your series, it seems that the Gnostics got so much right in terms of participatory knowing, serious play, ritual, and the like. But there also seems to be this dark side, which you've talked about,
Yeah, very
which
much.
can lead to conspiratorial thinking and extremism. So there seems to be this danger to the participatory knowing, which can be subject to serious bias that can lead to prejudice and even atrocity. So, you know, how do we benefit? Can we benefit from the beneficial, the transgressive features of Gnosticism without succumbing to their dangers? Like, for example,
Right.
can we have the benefits of Heideggerian thinking without the Nazism? You know,
Right.
and are the positive benefits to Gnosticism worth the risk of descending into theologies or philosophies that douse the world in blood, as you described it?
So I'm going to start with the answer to Heidegger because it's actually a good way to getting a doorway into my answer about the Gnostics. So I'm reading an excellent book that I highly recommend by Rakowski called Heidegger's Platonism. And the core of his argument is if you look at Heidegger in the 20s and the 30s, especially the 30s, when he's teaching on the allegory of the cave, he has this very positive evaluation of Plato. And then in 1940, he turns on Plato and makes him the villain of the history of metaphysics. And Rakowski argues there was something going on there. And I won't go into the argument of the book, so I'm just pointing you towards it. But basically, he argues that if Heidegger had stuck with, and what Rakowski argues, I think with pretty good scholarship, by the way, is a couple of Heidegger's key insights about, the critique of ontotheology and that being isn't the same thing as the being of beings. He gets those very, very directly and clearly from his work on Plato's myth of the cave. That's really clearly the case. And so Rakowski suspects, and I do too, that the thing with the Nazis, and he also needs to sort of distinguish his thought from Plato. That's part of the turn. And what Rakowski argued is if he had stayed, this is one of the explicit theses of the book, if he had stayed with that Platonic investigation, he wouldn't have gone down the dark route of getting involved with the Nazis, his most serious mistake, as he sort of really weakly. One of the things that pisses me off about Heidegger is my most serious mistake. Oh, that's really not a strong enough description of what just happened there, right? So I think that's really good. Now, and that actually segues into the answer I want to give you. So I've ordered it. I'm reading it, but I've looked at it before. So Plotinus has this argument with the Gnostics. He has a treatise on it, and one of the things that I toyed with doing explicitly, but I didn't know if it would get too digressive. So I left it there more of implicitly. I was trying to say that the Gnosis is really good, but Gnosticism, a better home for Gnosis is in Neoplatonism. Rather than within Gnosticism, because what you have ultimately, and this is so relevant to the lot of discussions I'm having with Zach and others right now, Zach Stein, about how we turn to mythopoetic thought. The thing with the Gnostics is, you get the open-ended symbolism, you get the serious play, you get the participatory knowing, but and this is the point, it's similar to the critique I made of their successors, the Romantics. The concern for self-deception and for rationality and wisdom are not given enough due. They're just not given enough due. And I think you get the same deep concern, especially within later versions of Neoplatonism, especially after Iamblichus, what you get in Proclus, because I recommend Chetlup's book on Proclus, the later Neoplatonists, or Shaw's book on Iamblichus and theurgy, because what you see in later Neoplatonism is you've got all of this amazing rational reflection. Proclus's Elements of Theology is the direct inspiration for Spinoza's Ethics, right? It's that logical, right? That rational. But that is deeply integrated with theurgia, with ritual and serious play. And it didn't seem to go off the rails in the way that Gnosticism does.
Do you think part of that might be the essentialism inherent in Neoplatonism?
I don't know if it's the essentialism, because the thing, many people have made the argument that Neoplatonism is basically a kind of a con, and that it takes you all the way through this essentialism, and then at the end it pulls the rug out from under you about essentialism, because it's like, oh, it's all this, but what's beyond, but the one, and the one is beyond essence, right? And it's like, oh no, right? Which is kind of this really cool move. I think it's this really interesting jujitsu move within Neoplatonism that I'm really intrigued about.
It enacts a drama in you.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, this is biased because of my own background, but maybe nevertheless, there's truth to it. So you be the judge. I think that Neoplatonism is a much more synoptic integrative approach, right? In which transgression has a role, right? There is the exploratory variation, but there's also the there's the compression and the synoptic integration. And I think that is missing in the Gnostics. The Gnostics are almost comprehensively transgressive. And then what's the only thing that can fill up that space is all of this, at times, and I mean this seriously, you know this, you've seen the series, at times very profound mythopoetic symbolism. But it's, like I said, it's divorced, even though there's all this mythopoetic representation of Sophia and wisdom and, you know, and self-transcendence. And they seem to, they talk at times that they like Plato, but there isn't, I can't find a clear wisdom project within the Gnostics. I can find it hollow. I can find like very clear. Pardon me.
I said, would you say it's hollow like Romanticism by any chance?
Geez, that's a good question. I mean, Romanticism. It tends to. Wow, that's really good. Because there's the same way, you know, there's a similarity there. I'm sorry, I'm playing with this in my mind. I hope.
Yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
There's a similarity, right? Because the way the Romantics treat the world as a blank canvas upon which they can project, that's very similar to the way there is this comprehensive rejection of the world within Gnosticism as something that you merely break through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. I hadn't thought of that connection before. That bears more thinking, but my initial response is, I think that's a very insightful connection. Yeah, that has to me at least the prima facie plausibility of a good insight.
Yeah, I think we've got some questions that actually touch upon that later. So, yeah, I hope you can get to them.
Yeah, just if I can do just a follow up. So on the risk, you know, in going forward, say in using gnosis in the religion that's not a religion, do you see a risk of saying, well, you know, ideally we focus on wisdom, or we focus on, you know, rationality, and we focus on areas to temper the more negative propensities that Gnosticism can lead to, but not everybody's going to follow, you know, in any movement, not everybody's going to follow it, and that there could be some dangers down the road by putting such an emphasis or putting such a high place for this type of.
Yeah, I think there's risk. Yeah, I do. I think there's risks of that kind of dark side of Gnosticism. I think it's emerging right now, and I've been talking about how the COVID crisis is exacerbating and accelerating domicide, reciprocal narrowing, and you know we're like in an Old Testament arena, because we have this invisible, nebulous, ubiquitous threat that can kill us and is literally demanding purity codes from us. I mean, we're in a Gnostic nightmare right now. And so the temptation for the dark side of Gnosticism and conspiracy theories are blossoming like crazy. So yeah, I think there's a risk. Yeah, I definitely think there's a risk. So that's what I mean. I guess I didn't do it well enough, I think. I was trying to separate Gnosis from Gnosticism, and I was trying to get.
No, I understand that, but I guess my thinking is, my question, I guess, is there something about those practices that we like that naturally leads to these dark sides? I don't know, in terms of bias and so.
Oh yeah, now I get your question better. So that's really interesting. I want to play with that question a little bit. You guys are doing really juicy, tasty stuff. I really like it. So, because one of the most interesting theses of Jung, and one that R.B. No, what's his? It's not R.B. I'm confusing the name. He wrote The Roots of Jung. I can't remember. It starts with an A. But anyways, the thesis of this, and this is one of the criticisms I have of Jordan Peterson, is that he tends to wed Jung, I think, too uncritically to an apologetics of Christianity, because Jung seems to have argued, and there's places where he explicitly states it, that the default mythology, and I use that word the way I use it in the series, the default mythology of the psyche is Gnosticism. That unless you do, and Jung is kind of ambivalent towards that too, by the way, right? That unless people are educated and unless they can do things, that people will sort of naturally default towards Gnosticism. And so the idea that there might therefore be a kind of, well, if you'll allow me, like a default attractor state towards that, yeah, that again strikes me as a really insightful hypothesis to explore. That, and you can see why, Christianity, for lots of other reasons too, by why Christianity and Neoplatonism formed this alliance. Part of why they formed that alliance, the alliance they did, was, I think, to provide a counteractive education and culture to sort of our Gnostic proclivities. So I think that's a really, yeah, I do think that, yeah, that there might be, the psyche might self-organize in ways that would default towards an attractor like that. That's at least I think that's a hypothesis worth thinking about in depth.
Almost reminds me of Girard in some aspects.
Yeah, very much. Yep, very much. And
scapegoating mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely, there's definitely that there, and that's again I mean, this is the point I make about don't try and deify or demonize any one of your faculties, because all of them are capable, right? And so the perspectival knowing, I talk about, it gives you presence and blah and all this great stuff, but Girard is exactly right. It also leads to malevolent mimesis, right? And the scapegoating. Yeah, definitely.
John, when's my turn? Just curious.
Yeah. You can go right ahead, Craig.
Oh, okay, thanks. I don't want to interrupt, but
No,
hi.
Go right ahead. Introduce yourself, though.
Okay, hi, Mr. Vervaeke. I'm very different than
John, please.
Oh, John, sure, certainly. My name is Craig Reed, and I'm very different than everybody here because I actually have my own agenda, and I latched onto you for a specific purpose. I'm very similar to Paul Vanderklay in a way because he's a traditional preacher. Yep. I'm kind of a traditional Christian apologist, sort of, in a weird way. And yep. I've latched onto you because of the language that you use is, I don't know how to say this correctly. I'm just being spontaneous. So give me your insights once I've done my little spiel.
Sure.
The language that you use, you're kind of a mini expert on parsing the language between, you use a lot of the language of neuroscience and you use it so precisely that it's really obvious to me that you studied the hidden mechanics of neuroscience really well. Pretty obvious that you actually are in neuroscience. Now, the language between science and religion, I'm just focused on the language. One of the people you specifically mentioned a lot in the beginning was Karen Armstrong. So I started reading her book. She's really good at that too. Yep. The language between neuroscience, and I'm kind of a traditional Christian apologist. I've latched onto you to lay hold of some of your language and internalize some of your language. So like one of the phrases, I don't know if it's you or me, but one of the phrases I've used in one of my videos, I call ritualized connection to the ineffable. I don't know if that's you or me or Karen Armstrong, somewhere in between. So whatever you got to say about that, whatever insight you offer, I'm good to go. Throw it out.
Okay. First of all, as I've mentioned it before, the affection and respect I have for, Paul Vanderklay, Jonathan Pajot, J.P. Marceau, Mary Cohen. I love talking with them. I love having discussions. I've learned from them. I've taken their criticism seriously. I've taken them to heart, if you'll allow me an older phrase. And so I think, and I want to give you what Paul said. capture every good thought, right? And so if you can capture every good thought for your project, that's great. And I want to say a couple things about this, because I want to be clear about what my position is. And Paul has been very generous in listening to me and discussing this with me. I have never claimed that people can't return to Christianity in some fashion and make it work for them. And I don't mean that in a dismissive fashion. I don't mean in an illusory fashion.
I totally understand. You're not going to step on my toes. Don't worry about it. I'm not sensitive to you insulting Christianity. I'm trying to absorb your language for my purposes, so you can't insult me. So don't worry about it. Just say what you want.
Thank you. So I've never said that that isn't possible for Christians. What I do say is I think that's also possible for Buddhists and Taoists and Neoplatonists, and I think that has to somehow work, with the project of Christian apologetics. I don't have to solve that problem because it's not my problem; it's yours. But I do think it's a problem that has to be solved. What I then wonder about, because you describe yourself, Craig, as a traditional apologist, and so I sometimes press Paul on this. Jonathan is weird because Jonathan is simultaneously a deep traditionalist and then also this radical revolutionary, and it's really hard. But both Mary Cohen and J.P. Marceau, especially J.P., are non-traditionalists in important ways, right? And so, why am I saying all that? Because, and again, I don't have a foreclosure argument. I see them as actually being effective precisely because they're trying to reformulate Christianity in some important way. Now,
I totally agree.
Okay, good. Okay, that's good.
Can I just tell you, Jonathan, because I had Paul on my channel, and we talked a lot about you, and we talked about a lot of Jonathan Pageau.
Please.
Okay, here's how I see Jonathan Pageau. He's kind of like an old ancient blues guy. Like not the Rolling Stones, but the guys who the Rolling Stones learned from, like a Robert Johnson. He's such a traditionalist that he's really innovative because he's so thoroughly internalized the traditions that he strikes everyone as innovative, but he's sucking up something that's been around for thousands of years. That's how I see him. I think you probably agree, right?
I do agree, but what I see him doing, and Jonathan and I, we tussle on this. So I'm saying what I see, and Jonathan and I sort of pull back and forth. I see him, I see him retooling a lot of the theurgic aspects of Neoplatonism in a really powerful way that I see similar to what was happening historically towards the end of Neoplatonism and people like Proclus and Damascus and people like that. So I think you're right. I think he's going back into the tradition, but he's doing something, right? He's it's not the right verb. I want something stronger than, I wanted to say re-educate, but he's making viable again the symbolic world. And I think that's a project that is in some, I get what you're saying, Craig. I don't know if I'm even disagreeing with you, but I think it's a radical reformulation precisely because I think the history of, at least I've argued that the history of Christianity, at least, Protestant and at least sort of a lot of Catholicism in the West, Eastern Orthodoxy, I'm a little not so sure about, but right. But, the symbolic has been right, especially in Protestantism, right? I think this is really, is it non-controversial? But the symbolic has been pushed right to the margins in really important ways. And Protestantism was the dominant form of Christianity of the two historical superpowers, Great Britain and the United States. So I don't think that's a small thing to say. And so I think bringing back the viability of the symbolic world is actually kind of world revolutionary for Christianity because it challenges, I would argue, the most world pervasive forms of Christianity that are out there right now.
Oh, I see. You're talking about something really, really complicated. I understand exactly what you mean, but it's really difficult to parse it out correctly, linguistic, like the language, right? I understand exactly what you mean. And I know what you mean, but it's hard to say perfectly right. That's why I latched onto you, because it's really hard to speak clearly in that middle ground between
Yeah.
Because religious people have a language. Paul knows the language because he preaches. He goes in front, and so he knows the language. I don't know religious language at all. I know your language because I was raised in the suburbs as a, just a normal teenager.
Right.
So I immediately understood that you were using language, really precise language, semi-expertly, like just how you think about language in the middle ground, so that a secular person or an atheist can listen to me because I've internalized some of how you process, how you talk and how you think. And they'll I don't actually have to do the research on the science, not interested, but like they'll know for a fact that there's some serious like neuroscience behind what I'm talking about in like analyzing substance rituals, things like that.
Yes, neuroscience and cognitive science. Here, I want to say something that falls, and I'm trying to make it fall in between in a way that's respectful. So I'm trying to do something, especially right now in my most current work, deeply analogous to Jonathan. And this will sound pretentious, but I'm trying to recover the logos, and not as a concept or a metaphysical entity, or just as something that shows up symbolically in art, but as something that we inactively participate in. Yeah,
I get that. I totally understand it.
Yeah.
That's in a way that is Christianity, though. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Probably not how you view Christianity, but
I get that. And in the series, I'm going to include Erigena as one of the people that took dialectic to kind of a culminating state in sort of the Socratic tradition. And
who's she? Who I don't know her.
John Scottis Erigena.
Okay.
He's a theologian. Jonathan Pajon, I talked about him in our last conversation. He's a theologian in the courts of, I believe, right around after the time of Charlemagne, and he was bringing sort of this. In my mind, he brought sort of Christian Neoplatonism to sort of this culminating fruition, and then he basically gets sort of pushed aside in the West. But you can see similar currents.
Can I ask a weird question? Do you think he got pushed aside because of a political agenda? Like, people accuse Christianity in particular, but religion of a power dynamic that was political first rather than spiritual and pure and ritual. Rituals are pure. I think you would agree with that, right? Ritual is purely connecting to something subjectively, right? Is that fair?
Well, there's two things. We can talk about ritual more at depth. But let me answer your first question, and then you can maybe.
Yeah, I'm not trying to talk too fast. I just know that you're smart enough to handle it. So if I'm throwing, I'm not throwing fastballs to throw you. I'm throwing fastballs because it's liberating. Honestly, I swear to God, that's true. I swear it's liberating because I know you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know you got some insights that you could really give me. So I'm trying to really cut to like something that you could give me that I could walk away with. If that makes any sense. Promise. I'm not trying to throw you.
So the answer to the first question is I'm ignorant. I don't know of anybody. We don't know why Erigena is pushed aside and he's sort of eventually declared heretical. It's not clear in the history. So I need to read more. I've been reading more, but I have not found any good convincing answer to that question yet. So I don't know if it's just my ignorance that I'm reporting right now, which is quite possible, or if there's just general ignorance, and that's why I haven't come across an answer. I haven't come across an answer, so I don't know. So the idea about ritual, I didn't quite catch everything you said. I think ritual is really, really important, and I think ritual is imaginal and transjective in all the ways I talk about that. It's one of the most important ways in which we get a participatory knowing of transjectivity, and therefore really afford deep transformation and aspiration. And I've talked about, in work I've published, how ritual integrates aspects of mindfulness and aspects of flow and aspects of hypnotism together. So why it's so powerful. I don't know if that's what you're asking me about, but I think both in terms of its functionality and the kind of knowing it affords to us. I think ritual is really important, and I've been consistently arguing for that. I don't think that ritual sits on its own. I think that ritual has to sit within mythos, and mythos has to connect to some lived sense of sacredness. But I can't see you actually well, I shouldn't speak to on your behalf, but it seems to me that you wouldn't disagree with what I just said there.
Just wanted to jump in. Well, Craig's might not be there, but
Oh, wait.
I just wanted
Oh,
to say on ritual. I wanted to say your series. Like, I've never been a big anti-theist, but your series just gave me a new appreciation of the benefits of religious ritual that I hadn't appreciated in any way before. So that I just wanted to chime in. Thank you for that.
Well, I mean, that's where Jordan Peterson and I are in a kind of deep alliance. I mean, Jordan Peterson is a really complex guy, and I know him more personally than most people. I'm not close friends with him, but I have spoken with him at length, in person, and we've been together at conferences and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think made Jordan famous was what and these two belonged, well, one thing with two parts. He put his finger on the meaning crisis, and he put his finger on that there's a functionality to religion that the new atheists were missing. And in some ways, I've tried to articulate what Jordan was ascending to and trying to lay out and explicate it and elucidate it. I have some criticism, therefore, of his work, but I want to give due credit to the power of what he did there. Jordan, I think Jordan wants to be Moses and I want to be Socrates, and that's a fundamental difference between us. Well, he lays down 12 rules and I just try and talk to people as much as I can. So there's a bit of a difference there.
I was really thinking just earlier today that you have the charisma of a teacher, but he has the charisma of a proselyte or a prophet. And that's the distinction between you two.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I would agree with that. So I think, I mean, and Brett, part of what the research shows is that the nuns are by and large not rejecting religion because of sort of atheistic argumentation. I mean, some do, of course, but by and large, the rejection, because many of them take up alternative ersatz religions of their own and spiritualities of various kinds and all kinds of things. So thinking that that's a group of sort of homogenous, argumentatively convinced atheists is just demographically false in my mind. And so what's more important to me is, and thank you, by the way, for saying, my concern for the nuns, NONES, is real, because it is deeply real, because my older son is in that place, and I see it, right? So I care about it deeply, personally as well. I think the reason why the nuns are rejecting most of the established religions because of sort of what I tried to get under this notion of viability. They don't find them viable. They don't find them as spaces in which, well, if you'll allow me to quote St. Paul, in which they could live and move and have their being. And so it's for them, if it's not primarily a matter of evidence, it's much more a matter of relevance. And this has to do with all kinds of things. It has to do with the history. It has to do with the fact that we have sort of, I take Thomas Bjorkman's argument to be a good one. We've sort of defaulted to the market as our only God and as our only normative authority. And, and that messes up, that defaulting and collapsing, that homogenization of kind of idolatrous normativity, I think also strangles how traditional religious ways of life could be viable to people. So I think there's historical reasons that I went over at length in the series. I think that there's current situation happening right now where we're at sort of socioeconomically, sociopolitically. And I think those are much more relevant factors. And what that means for me and for Jordan is to step back and say, okay, let's take it then that the new atheist diagnostic, and the only one of the new atheists that I actually sort of respect as a thinker is Dennett, by the way, because he's also a good cognitive scientist. So what if we acknowledge that the empirical evidence seems to show that it's a viability issue, we can then deeply ask what was so viable about the religious way of life. I think that's the question that is afforded, and Jordan opened that question up. I was already independently working right on this, and then he opened it up, and my work converged with it, I think, in a felicitous manner.
Spot on, I think, what you just said. I think that's 100% on the mark.
Oh, well, thank you for that, Greg.
Nick, did you have a question you wanted to go to?
Yeah, we can keep moving. That was a great area of the conversation there. So this one, it actually seems like it's almost been answered in pieces as we've been talking, but I will put it forth and see what you think about it. Is the permanent quest an act of domicide because you are denying yourself a place of refuge? How do you get a sense of home if you're always in a permanent quest? It seems like being able to have a secure sense of home actually alters our understanding or affords us a novel form of exploration. So it's not to say we should be staying home, but it does mean that it does change the character of the explorations we do move through. And this is kind of a two-parter. I tied in Heidegger here as well, because Dasein and the definition of Dasein seems to have this kind of a domicide-like effect.
Well, at least the thrownness is definitely at least resonates with domicide in some ways. Yeah. Okay, so let me try the first part, and then maybe that'll give me the tools for getting into Heidegger, which is always dangerous. So one of the things I try to explore in the series, and this goes back to, I think it overlaps, and maybe you're alluding to this, it overlaps with that, the distinction between kinds of narratives that we were talking about earlier. Because I'm very interested in the project that came out of the Cynics and the Stoics of trying to really deeply reformulate what home meant in a powerful way. And then I see this also in aspects of Taoism too. And I think the Stoics actually corrected the Cynics in a powerful way, because I think the Cynics are transitional. They get sort of this halfway idea. So the idea is that, home is actually what you set your heart on. That's the Cynic idea, right? And it's more your skills and virtues and sensitivities and sensibilities by which you are capable of establishing agent arena relationships, affording participatory knowing. And so in that sense, home is much more a functional thing for the Cynics, but they sort of think, well, what that means is, make your home somewhere other than man-made institutions. And I think that's still a mistake. And where I think what the Stoic correction of that, which I think is the deep insight, is no. What you should be thinking about the homing process, and what you should be understanding what it's doing. And what it's doing is instead, right, it's the whole thing, it's bringing into awareness, right, this the process of co-identification, et cetera, et cetera. And then what Stoicism, I think, then says is, and it's this interesting move, and it's kind of the essence, of rationality. One of the essential moves, not the essence, sorry, one of the essential moves of rationality, which is take your fixation off the products of your cognition and put it on the process. Because I hope by saying all that, I'll now say something that doesn't sound paradoxical or ridiculously self-referential. The Stoics recommend that we find our home in the homing process itself. And then for me, that is always part of a quest, because what I try to argue is, right, sacredness is always a movement between like the accommodation, the opening up to the numinous, but also the assimilation, and it's relevance realization writ large. It's the deep, right? It's the variation and the compression, and the homing is the assimilation, and the numinous is, right, the accommodation. And you have both of those on a quest, because if you only have one, you don't have quest, you have horror. And if you only have the other, you don't have quest, you have just staying at home. So
yeah.
That's I think that insight of trying to find your home in the homing process itself, and seeing how it is bound up with, you know, the project of exposing yourself to the way reality, because the Stoics were important about this, reality transcends any of our meaning making projects. And so although they are constantly homing themselves in their wisdom, right, they are also constantly reminding themselves of the horror of fate.
I see. You know, it's interesting. It actually, it seems like there's a tie-in with an idea I've been trying to play with, that you directed me towards, which was anatheism.
Yeah.
And I'm probably misusing it from the original source. But what I realized trying to kind of integrate it in a more participatory way rather than an intellectual was that it almost felt more like having faith in the resurrective potential of the story rather than having faith in the characters of the story. So in a sense, it's like having faith that if this thing dies, it will come back. And so I don't have to hold on to it and try and preserve its life artificially.
Thank you, Nick, because this is what I'm trying to get at with Socratic faith, as this sense of right relationship, continuity of contact with the logos, rather than the assertion against evidence of a set of propositions that guarantee me that I get to this particular place, right? And so, that sense of Socrates, because Socrates, I mean, the dialogues famously often do not close; they do not complete. Right, but he's willing to. He has a faith in the logos that he's willing to follow the argument wherever it can go. And I keep saying, pay attention to the fact Socrates is ridiculously relevant right now. He's doing the dialectic when Athens is literally under siege and has suffered a huge plague that has killed Pericles and a lot of the leadership. He's ridiculously relevant right now, and his Socratic faith, right, not only got him and his followers through the crisis, it afforded, it was one of the things that laid the seeds for stealing the culture eventually.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because again, just referencing that, the sense of security that kind of washed over me upon transitioning into that form of faith was, well, it felt more like a home than trying to stick to the propositional, which almost felt like staying in somebody else's home.
Wow, I love your phenomenology here. This is so cool. Because I was talking to somebody about this earlier, and I was trying to get at the notion of Socratic faith as the way I'm faithful to my partner. And that is some of the old biblical imagery, and right, in both the Old Testament in God's covenant with Israel, and the New Testament in Christ's relationship to the church, right? And so my faithfulness to this, I'm in this like amazing relationship with this woman, right? And my faithfulness to her is not that what it is I'm trying to maintain, this continuity of contact with her so that I stay in right relationship with her. Not that I keep her fixed, or I'm saying this is where the relationship is going to go, because I can't do that to the relationship. I don't have that authority over it. I don't know how it's going to go, other than I have the sense of, if I am right, if I get into right being, I will be coupled to this relationship, wedded to it, if you'll allow me this language, in the right way. So I stay in right relationship to her. And so I stay on course with this relationship. And that's the sense of faithfulness I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Yep. And right, in my mind, it's triggering a lot of the Christian symbolism that talks about a similar, right?
Yes.
There's many points where it's saying, like, don't follow the letter of the law, like you're not accomplishing anything by doing that, etc. But yes, that was wonderful.
Yes, I agree with that too, what you just said. Yes.
Now, John, we want to be very respectful of your time. We've so far gone an hour and 50 minutes. Are you willing and able to go on for several more questions?
Well, I actually, it's getting to the point where I'm going to need to go to the washroom soon.
Gotcha.
Because we've been here a while.
If you'd like you to take a break, we could like interact with the chat for a while, or if you'd like to actually put it into it,
well,
we're fine with either.
Well, I'm actually genuinely torn here because I'm having a rip-roaring good time right now.
As are we.
Yeah, we're very pleased.
I'm also sort of wanting to spend some time with some of my loved ones tonight.
Sounds like we should schedule another discussion.
Yeah, invite him back for a shorter chat.
Yeah. If I'm happy with that, actually. Yeah.
You'd be happy with that? All right. Can you handle one more question at least before we leave?
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't we go for like another 5 more minutes or so, and we wrap it up. But yeah, I like what Benjamin's suggesting. I'm happy to come back.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great.
And we'll do that question, and then I'll do a little show for.
Yeah, if we can have a little bit of time
after
we end the recording, that would be great, if that's possible.
Yeah.
All right, Brett, you want to give them the question you had there?
Sure. So I just want to make sure. Am I muted? No. Okay. Great. So like I said, I'm I'm right in your target audience. I'm an agnostic, but you've warned against autodidacticism.
Yes.
But I guess my question is, what should someone like me be doing right now? While the religion that's not a religion doesn't exist, while these institutions don't exist,
yeah, I get that.
When we're not, when there isn't that structure and that group and that community that has the experts who are guiding us through all the rituals and so on. What should we be doing now?
Okay. Well, first of all, sorry, I really don't want this to be self-promotional, but it is the case at hand. I think what you've been doing, like following through my series while being in a deep discussion group, is exactly one of the things you should be doing, that you use as a deep training at many of the kinds of knowing of your normativity, so that when you're trying to put together an ecology of practices, you don't whiz off into some crazy direction. Yeah, very much. So I think, if you'll allow me to redescribe what you've been doing for 50 hours or more over all this time, I think that this was actually a spiritual exercise for you in the deep sense of the word, in the way Pierre Adome. And I think this is where dialogos and dialectic act as that metapsychotechnology that train you existentially, train you in all the kinds of knowing, so that they hone your sense of normativity, of what's true, good, beautiful, relevant, right? So that when you're looking at psychotechnologies, when you're looking at putting together an ecology of practices, you can do this with discernment and with rationality. That's what I would say.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's perfect too, because like about like several episodes into us like doing the series on YouTube, I've realized that what we're doing is not really very provocative, I'm sure, to an audience, but it's really provocative for ourselves, just because it puts us into a situation where we have to make the notes, we have to focus and intently try to understand each of your episodes, and they're like highbrow stuff. You have to actually put in effort in order to understand your work, and through that, 50 hours of watching your lectures, and then each conversation about being like 2.5 hours sometimes, it's like you're actively developing your understanding for your work, and from there, hopefully cultivating wisdom for moving forward.
That is, I mean, I don't want to put demands on people, but that is how I want my series to be watched. I want it to be watched by groups of people that discuss it in deep dialogue about it. That's how I want it to be watched.
Perfect. All right. Well, yeah, thank you very much, John. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy that we've been able to have this time with you and go through all these questions.
I've had a fantastic time. I think these questions were excellent, and I tried to answer them as honestly and as deeply as I could.
Yes, thank you.
That was absolutely wonderful. Yeah,
amazing.
All right, so I'm going to end the stream,
Phenomenal.
but just hold on for a second inside the Zoom call while we finish things up. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.